Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for trudging up the hill in the cold and the rain. I'm Dennis McNamara. I'm the director of the Center for Beauty and Culture here in the college. And happy to have you here and happy to welcome Henry Wingate, who's here with his son. They're on a Raven Day tomorrow. So I said, hey, you're here anyway. Could you come tell us about what you do? And I think what you'll find is very interesting today is that we talk about the Catholic faith being handed on from one generation to the next, an apostolic religion. In some ways, you'll hear from him how his painting career is an apostolic kind of thing, keeping alive customs and traditions from several generations ago. He will probably describe himself as a late starter, started painting at the age of 28, so if any budding artists in the room, it's not too late for you. Having served 6 years in the Navy as a pilot, and then as an F-14 pilot stationed in Virginia, and discovered after that that there were a group of ateliers, or these small working studios where they teach the custom of painting in a style that he found that he always loved, although many people thought was impossible. And so he'll talk tonight about working with Paul Ingebrigtsen, who was a painter in Boston, the Boston School. You'll see it right here. And then some other teachers as well. So right now his studio is in rural Virginia, paints landscapes and still lifes, and more recently some big works for the Catholic Church. He's won a number of awards. I only picked a few of them here. The first prize from the American Society of Portrait Artists in 2000, Gold Medal of Honor at the 2003 Hudson Valley Art Association, which sounds kind of like a local painting group, but the Hudson Valley School of Painting is a much wider and broader thing than just a local art club. And Best Painting from Life Award from the National Oil and Acrylic Painter Society in 2003. So I think you'll find interesting person to listen to and give some hope for that there's still beauty possible in the field of painting. So please give a welcome to Henry Wingate. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Dr. McNamara, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. And one of my favorite things to do, if it's not drawing or painting, it's talking about art. So I'm glad to be able to tell you about what I do. And I also like art history, which is a fun topic. So I'll talk about this lineage that Dr. McNamara mentioned. But let's start with the prayer, since that's a good way to start everything. So say, in the name of the Father, and the Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the incredible beauty of your creation. We thank you for the gift of the creation of art. We ask that you increase our gratitude towards you, and we ask for your blessing upon us tonight. Mother Mary, please pray for us. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Okay, so I wanted to tell you about the Boston School and my connection to it. So we'll look at some artists from about 100 years ago, mostly centered in the city of Boston, in that general area. They all studied mostly in Paris, which is really the art center of the world, art training, at least in the Western world, in the 19th century. So we'll look at them, and there's this interesting link back that I found after I got out in the Navy, found this school up in Boston, and this teacher taught this traditional type of painting, which I thought was just gone. You know, modern art changed a lot of things in the early 20th century. The year 1913 is sort of an important year. It's when a lot of modern art was first exhibited in the U.S. The Armory Show happened in New York City, and a lot of modern art was shown in New York, in the whole country for the first time. So anyway, that's a watershed type of year where things started changing. So the traditional training that produced this kind of painting was somewhat gradually pushed to the side. So modern art really changed the training. So there are a few links that go back to this type of training, and I found one of those, and so studied with my two teachers. And I was thrilled when I did discover that. So first, let's look at a few of these artists. This is a painter named Joseph de Camp. He's probably my favorite of the Boston School. You know, when you have a group of artists that paint in a similar way, maybe know each other, exhibit together, art historians call that a school of art. So this became a school of art, the Boston School, late 19th century, early 20th century. Joseph de Camp was one of the leading painters in that school. He painted this picture of his daughter. The title of this is Sally. It's in Worcester, Massachusetts, in the museum there. But a very beautiful portrait of his daughter. And this is a picture of some of these painters. Joseph de Camp is back there in the upper right, and a couple others, Tarbell and Benson, we'll look at. This is another painting by Joseph de Camp. And a point I'd like to make at this now is about the lighting. You can tell that lighting is very important to these artists. You would have a single light source coming from the front of this model, illuminating the front of her, and then the shadows behind. So the visual world was very important to these artists, and that really goes back to the Baroque era, the 1600s. A lot of artists got very interested in just exactly what the light is doing on, say, a model or something they're painting, and then how they see it and how they could duplicate that on canvas. So it has to do with sharp edges, things that are easily seen versus things that are not very easily seen. If you look to the left of the canvas, there's a lot of shadow. The left of that largest urn, you can't even see the left side of that. That's called a lost. So the combination of things that are found, meaning easily seen, as in the front of her, versus things that are lost into the shadows. If you can get that combination right in your painting, if it's similar to what's in the real world in front of your eyes, then you get a real sense of three-dimensionality and realism in your painting, or breadth. Breadth is a good word, meaning it has atmosphere, sense of unity and realism. So that's one thing I love about the Boston School that came from the Baroque era. So Joseph Camp, you see his dates, 1858, 1923. They all were born in the same general time frame. Frank Benson, born a few years later, lived into the mid-20th century. Now, I put this one in here because it shows an influence from the French Impressionists. So they would paint outside in direct sunlight, but this is very impressionistic. So the Boston School is a good combination, I think, of great color from the Impressionists, but still academically rigorous. From the word academic means, in art terms, means a student that went to an academy of art and learned to draw very, very accurately. A lot of figure drawing, a lot of portrait drawing. So that all became very, that's called an academic training. So the Boston School had this nice, very, very good combination of influence from the Impressionists and from the academic, accurate training. So that's Benson. And then Edmund Tarbell with this great portrait of a judge, same birth year as Benson. But notice the light coming from our left, really illuminating that one side of the judge's face, and then the shadow on the other side. So, that's on a flat canvas, perfectly flat as a piece of paper. Yet it looks very three-dimensional, doesn't it? And that all comes from the shadows, the lights and the darks, the losts and the founds. So the side of his face in the light, and then his white shirt showing against the dark suit, that really jumps out at you. So we call that a found, something that's high contrast and quick to be seen, as opposed to a lot of the lower part of the canvas just being lost into the shadows. You can't really see where the bottom of the chair legs are, the table. But it doesn't bother us because we're used to that in the real world. A lot of times things aren't easily seen, and our minds and eyes work so well together that we're not bothered that you can't make it out. So if you can duplicate that on a canvas, you can get a very great sense of realism and that breadth and atmosphere. So that's something that the Boston School understood very, very well. And then John Singer Sargent. Now he is not exactly part of the Boston School, but I like him so much I snuck him in here. Same years, 1856, so same time period. He's an American artist. He was born in Italy, really lived his whole life in Europe. So he's not considered part of the Boston School, but he painted in a similar way. And I love this portrait. So that whole idea of the light light and shadow, things that are easily seen. Notice the light side of her face and neck kind of just melt into the chair. So I wish I could be there when Sargent set this up, but you could just tell he's so interested in the light and things that were lost. That's a light on light loss. You can't really tell where her neck is or her cheek. But then there's that dark green leaf maybe on the chair right against her cheek and earlobe, and that really jumps out at you. So there's things kind of coming and going. You can make it out easily, you can't make it out, then you make it out again. And it's just the way the real world works. And to get that on canvas gives you that sense of atmosphere. So beautiful portrait. And then the same thing about the loss. See how the dark hair just melts into the shadow, her cast shadow on the background. So you have lots of loss and founds that go together so well. So that's Sargent. And then William Paxton, this is back to a real Boston school painter. He's a little bit later, 1869, and he's very important because he taught this painter, Ives Gammell, who's a generation later, born in 1893. So he studied with Paxton. After Paxton studied in Paris, came back to Boston and started teaching students. So it's this idea that Dr. McNamara mentioned about a teacher passing on what he's learned to a student. So Gammell, as a young man in the early 20th century, studied with Paxton. And then at the same time, 1913, with this lot of modern art coming into the country and art training changing, Gammell recognized that. He realized what he had been taught and loved it. I love painting this realistic way. So he decided to make it his life's work to teach, to try to pass on what he had learned. So all through the 20th century until close to his death, he taught. He would only take 5 students at a time, and he'd teach them. And it takes years. He'd spend 4 or 5 years, a student would, with Gammell in Boston. So my 2 teachers studied with Gammell in the 1970s. So it's probably, I kind of like to say that my teachers studied with a man who was born in 1893. It doesn't seem possible, but it was. And so when I was getting out of the Navy, trying to figure out what I was going to do for my real career, I found this teacher up in Boston, Paul Ingertson, who was here. He's still living, he's still teaching. So I like to point out to young students of art that these ateliers are still going. So Paul Ingertson's still teaching. He's in Lawrence, Massachusetts now, but still teaching, has a handful of students. And you can see how beautiful that portrait is. Isn't that just beautiful? The color, the color in her ear, color in her cheeks. Really wonderful portrait. So when I found out about Gammell teaching Ingertson and found out that Ingertson was there teaching, I went up to meet him. And as soon as I walked into the studio, I knew this is what I wanted to do. It was very, very sort of otherworldly. There's no artificial light. It's just natural light. It was in an old factory that had big windows facing north. Any idea why you want a north-facing window in an art studio, and only north, not others? Yes. Yes, exactly. Good. So the northern hemisphere, we want a north-facing window because the sun will never shine into the window directly. Because if the sun shines into the room, it'll just move across the room and the shadows will change, and you can't have any time that you need to look at the model or look at the setup. So you need lots of time. So north-facing window is important. So as soon as I went into that studio up near Boston, I knew this was just what I wanted. So a lot of students, he had about 15 students, and they were all just very quietly looking at their setup, either a portrait model or a still life model or a cast. A cast is a plaster cast of a statue, usually a famous statue. You can get duplicates, replicas of these famous statues. So I remember drawing a Michelangelo, or a replica in plaster, white plaster, of a Michelangelo, one of the de Medicis in the San Lorenzo church in Florence. So you get this beautiful statue, and you spend your time drawing that. So it also influences your taste. If you look at these great works of art while you're learning to draw, it's sort of a double win situation. So you do a lot of cast drawing, which is really trying to train your eye to see accurately. Because if you want to do a portrait, you really have to get her nose right and get her eyes right. A lot of times people will say, well, isn't it okay if it's a little bit off? Well, not so much if you're trying to do a commissioned portrait and the husband wants his wife to look like his wife. So you can train your eye to see really accurately, and these great artists in the past would do that. And you read about Michelangelo spending, being an apprentice when he was 13 years old. So you spend your whole teenage years studying this, working at it. Just like you try to learn a musical instrument really, really well, takes years of training. Good teacher, good training, a whole lot of practice. So same with art, if you want to train your eye to see accurately and well. All right, so Gamble taught Ingebrigtsen, and this painter, Charles Cecil, another American who studied with Gamble in the 70s. Cecil has since moved to Florence, Italy, and been there for the last 40 years. And he's still teaching. So I spent 5 years with Ingebrigtsen, and then spent about a year, not quite a year, with Cecil in Florence. It's a really good combination. So they both had the same foundation in the 1970s with Gamble, with that training. But then Cecil went to Florence. He's been there forever, very long time. So he's more influenced by the Italian old masters, and Ingebrigtsen is more influenced by the Boston school painters. So I think my palette, you call an artist's palette, means is the colors he uses. It also means the wooden thing you put your paints on. But you talk about an artist's palette as the colors he uses. So my palette was influenced by Cecil once I went there. It was a little bit more subdued. He's not as colorful as Paul Ingebrigtsen. I mean, it's pretty subtle, but you can see a difference. But two very good painters and very, very good training. One of the great things about Cecil, of course, is being in Florence. We've been talking about that today quite a bit, and the benefits of living in Florence are tremendous. For one thing, there are a lot of students. There's good competition. I think competition helps. Pushes yourself. And then he just had great models, and I painted more portraits there than I did up in Boston. So and then a lot of art history. You can talk about a Titian portrait, and the next day you can go see it, at the museum down the street. So very good training. I recommend it for anyone. I try to spread the word because it's very little known that these schools are available, still going, and still putting out painters. There's another American in New York City, a fellow named Jacob Collins, who teaches and puts out really good students. A little different lineage. He wasn't taught by Gamble, but there are some other threads that take you back to this more old-fashioned traditional training. So if anybody is interested, or you know somebody, or if you want to do it, afterwards I'll give you, make sure you know the names. They all have websites, and the schools are easily found online. But please do spread the word. I think it's a way to improve the arts of the time. I think it'll take generations. I'm starting to teach. I have some students, and each generation I think maybe gets a little bit better. So that was happening in look at the Baroque period, or Renaissance to Baroque. It's very often that a teacher will teach a student. In fact, I thought about putting a slide in here, which I didn't do, of Raphael's teacher from Perugia. It's a Perugino? Perugino. A Perugino painting of a young lady who looks just like a Raphael painting. Well, Perugino taught Raphael, and so you can see the similarities. But then, I think that's one of the few that I would get mixed up. You can pretty easily tell them apart. But you certainly learn from your teacher, and then move on and then teach your own students, and just on down through the generations. So very important. So I think, if we can do that now, if I can teach my children and others, and then they can teach, and maybe we can get back to this, maybe get back to this, or this like the sergeant or the judge. I have some paintings of judges. Soon you'll see, but they certainly don't get to this level. I mean, think about that. That's a flat canvas. Doesn't that seem like there's so much depth? You could walk around his chair, walk behind him. Okay, so I was thrilled to find those teachers. This is a painting of mine. So I finished. So I think I started in 1994, when I got out of the Navy. Spent about 6 years training. So right around the turn of the century, started doing this on my own, or trying to make a living at it. This is an early portrait, actually, of my brother's fiancée. So I was trying to feature the engagement ring. And now my sister-in-law, Bethany. But you can see the single light source, the light on one side, the dark on one side. And I wanted to mention here the benefit of working from life. So I only like to work from someone sitting in front of me instead of copying a photograph. A lot of artists today will copy photographs, and it's much easier to do that. So it's easier for the sitter. Bethany had to sit there for about 30 hours, usually 3 hours at a time, with breaks. She'd pose for maybe 25 minutes, then take a 5-minute break, and then come back and try to get in the pose. And I'd say, well, move your arm up a little bit, do this. Get back in the pose. So it's a lot harder for everybody, harder for the painter, harder for the sitter. If there's an agent connecting the two, harder for them to arrange everything. But the result is much better, and it's worth it. And all the great paintings in the past were done from life. Van Dyck, portrait. Of course, the person was sitting there in front of him. So it's very much worth it. So a couple of things. The benefits of working from life are the color. Color's better in life. You're actually looking at the person instead of looking at a photograph, hoping the color's right. The form is better in life. Form just means the shape in all 3 dimensions, so not only up and down, left and right, but also in and out. So the depth. So if you're looking at a 3-dimensional person in front of you, you're much more likely to render it as 3-dimensional rather than looking at a 2-dimensional photograph that's trying to look 3-dimensional. So the 3-dimensionality is better. And then the third thing is the time spent with the model is beneficial to you as a painter. And that mostly comes from things changing slightly. And in a female model, the hair will change more than a short-haired fellow. So I remember her hair changing quite a bit. And one day, that little bit of hair on our left, her right, was a little bit more forward, and the light caught it. And it was so much better that way. It needed that little bit of light over on the left. And I hadn't seen that for about a week, I think. I did a drawing and then started painting. So you get to see slight changes, and if something improves, then you get to go with that. So I remember my teacher, Ingebrigtsen, saying, while we were painting a model, and it's kind of frustrating, especially when you're early on at it and you're just trying to get a likeness, trying to learn how to put these things together, and the model's hair is completely different. And you say, well, and he'd come up and critique you and say, well, you really got this wrong. I said, well, it was like that yesterday. And he said, well, it's like this today. You've got to chase it. You got to change it. And it's so frustrating. But the reason is that he wants you to notice it and see the improvements. Make it a malleable process so that you can make improvements. And this is just a great example of that, when that little bit of hair lit up, and I realized that's so much better. Clothing does that too. Folds in clothing will change. Hands, slight different gestures in hands because they vary so much. So that sort of thing is very beneficial to work from life because of those improvements you can make. Okay, then I also do some still life painting. This is still life I did, but the same principles of the light, single light source, things well lit up versus well shadowed, trying to make it look round. Highlights are really fun. I think my favorite thing to do in a painting is put a highlight maybe in the person's eye. The highlights in Bethany's eye. Yeah. See the little it's a reflection of the light coming through the window. But when you put a highlight in an eye, usually sort of brings a person to life. So you get the most bang for your buck with a highlight because there's one little tiny stroke, and that really lightens it up. So same thing with the highlights on the vase. Highlight on little blue glass. Really kind of try to get the zing of the light. So the light is so important to us as realistic artists. There's a book I like, I recommend, it's kind of for maybe teenage, called I, Wanda Pareja. Anyone come across that? It's Wanda Pareja was Velázquez's studio, I think slave at first, assistant later on. And it's written from his point of view, the servant's point of view. It's a great idea. Velázquez is a very good Baroque artist from Spain who's sort of the godfather of this visual order type of painting, understanding how the eye works and lost and founds, things that come to your eye and are lost. So it's a great painting actually his servant posed for Velázquez, and Velázquez painted him. I don't have a slide of it, unfortunately, but very great portrait. But somebody had the great idea to write a book about Velázquez from this servant's viewpoint. And so the point I was making is when Velázquez moved from southern Spain up to Madrid because of the king of Spain, what's his name? Philip IV, who Velázquez painted probably 20 times. Philip IV asked Velázquez to come be his court painter. So in this book, the writer understood about the importance of the studio, and Velázquez was saying to his servant, I don't really care about living in the palace with the king. I just care about the light. How's my studio going to be? Which is truth to that. That a real artist cares about his light. Okay, here's just another still life. Same idea of lost and founds. The light, the shadows are as important as the objects themselves. Another great thing about painting is trying to get the chroma. Chroma means the brilliance of a color. That's something that Paul Ingbertson's really, really excellent at, is seeing the color, especially in the shadows. I should tell you a couple sayings of Paul Ingbertson's that are kind of telling. One is that the strength of a painting comes from the color in the darks. And very often you see in amateurish paintings, you see black or gray shadows, just dull shadows. And that's not the way it usually is. So see the shadow on the right side of the onions, or the cast shadow from the garlic, or the cast shadow from the onions themselves. So have a lot of brown, red, a whole lot of chroma, which chroma means the brilliance of a color, in there. So you really want to get that. So you should, if you go to a museum and you look at pictures, try to notice those sorts of things. Is there a lot of color in the darks? Is there a lot of chroma? Chroma doesn't have to be just in the darks. It could be in the lights too. So the chroma of the onions is quite high. It's a lot of orange and reds are very chromatic, yellow. So the chroma is very important, and that was something Paul was great at. And it takes time to learn to see color. I remember him saying, coming up and looking at my painting, it was kind of, my still life was dull, not very colorful, and he said, no, you're not seeing it yet. You keep trying, you'll learn. It takes years to see the color properly. And I'd be so frustrated, thinking, my eyes work well. Maybe they work too well. In fact, he used to say you work too well. You were a pilot, your eyes were good. And that's another thing he'd say. You don't zoom in and just paint one little aspect. You're supposed to look at the whole thing, take the picture as a whole. So there are techniques about keep your eye moving. Want to paint that little bit of garlic, but if I just zoom in on it, I can make it too important. Not compare the value. Value is just a light and dark. Not compare the value to other values. What's lighter, the picture or the garlic? They're pretty similar. Maybe a little bit more yellowy in that left garlic. The highlights are about the same. So you always want to compare things. So keep your eye moving, look at the whole thing, and always compare. But it's a saying of Paul's that's telling about his just unusual way of seeing the world. He'd say, we'd be there, standing back, looking at the cast, and I'm trying to draw it. And he'd say, you know what people say, don't just stand there, do something. He says, well, I say just the opposite. Don't just do something, stand there. I mean, look at it longer. You say, look at the thing 3 times for every mark you make. So it's very, very slow, deliberate looking, and a lot of comparing. So still life is very enjoyable to paint. For one thing, you don't have the model there who needs to take a break or who won't get right back into the pose. But this is kind of a fun photograph of my model right there beside my painting. This is Mr. Opie from Stanton, and his family owned the local paper for generations. And so he wanted to hold the paper. Had his UVA, do you see his UVA ring? Dr. McNamara, you probably have one of those. Well, yeah, it's actually, he doesn't have it on in life, but it's in the painting. He must not have worn it that day. But you can see how a lot of the artistry of this actually comes in the setup of the picture. Because once I have him set up in the light I like, to get his head to look round, in the background he wanted a library setting. In fact, the painting hangs in the presidential library in Stanton, Woodrow Wilson's presidential library. And he was part of that board, I think, so it hangs in there. So he wanted books in the background. He wanted his newspaper, his UVA class ring, his pin, I don't remember what that was, Rotary Club maybe. And then I wanted to have this certain lighting. And we talked about the color of his suit and the color of his tie. It's good to have something highly chromatic. The tie is very chromatic, that red. So I like the composition. So a lot of the artistry comes in me choosing how the lighting's going to be, how he's going to pose, that sort of thing. Where the head's going to go on a canvas. Like this is kind of fun little thing that you can remember when you go into a museum. There's a good placement of a head on a canvas, sort of a noble placement. And very often you see portraits where the head's just too low and there's too much canvas above. It's not as noble as nice and high. So that's something to notice in portraits. So there's the painting, a little bit unfinished. Made him look a little bit younger. One of the benefits is you work from pretty far back. In fact, Leonardo da Vinci in his notebooks wrote that the best viewing distance from a work of art should be 3 times its greatest dimension. So if you have a 5-foot tall painting, 15 feet back, 3 times that 5 feet is a good distance to view from, which is just comfortable. If you're looking at a big painting, you want to be back so you can see the whole thing. So we use that when we work as well. So this is probably a 40-inch tall canvas, maybe 45-inch tall canvas. So I'd be at least 3 times back from that. And actually even further, you might see better. So you don't notice the little wrinkles. So it usually makes somebody look a little bit younger, just because you're working so far back. There's a finished portrait, not a great slide. All right, here's a judge that I painted not too long ago, Judge Tice. But not as good as Tarbell's judge, but trying to use the same principles. This judge, actually, I said something about, well, one of the nice things about working with a person is you get to know them. So I spent probably 30 hours with this judge. He was in Richmond, so I'd drive down to Richmond and work with him. Actually spent some nights down there. And he'd pose for 3 hours a day. So I got to know him. And I said something about liking his bow tie. He's a collector of bow ties. So you get to know him, you talk a lot. Before I'm painting the features, we can talk while I'm working. So it's fun to that's a good part of it, is getting to know the person. It's something, hopefully you get some of that into the painting. And it mostly comes from getting a sort of a gesture that's very characteristic of them. So I said something about his bow tie. He said, well, I'll give it to you, but you have to wear it to the unveiling. So I own this bow tie now. And, wore it to his unveiling. People that thought it was pretty cute. Another judge, this one's in Harrisonburg. But same idea of single light source, light side, dark side, lost and founds. I actually have a good teaching tool that came from this portrait. These judges retire and they need a portrait for their courtroom. Well, this judge's wife wanted a copy of the portrait to go in their house because the portrait was going to be in the courtroom. So they do these good, high-quality copies now on canvas called a giclée, a fancy French word, just means a good copy on canvas. And so I took it to a place in Charlottesville that took a good photograph of my painting, and then a couple weeks later came back to look at a proof. And I went in. I wish I had brought it. It's kind of fun. I looked at the proof, which is kind of small, and I noticed right away that something was very wrong. There was a cutout line around this around the whole judge, around his shoulders, even in the place that you can't see his shoulder versus the background on both sides, or his shoulder against the chair, or his sleeve over there on our left against a chair. That's a complete loss, and I didn't paint the edge of his robe and then get rid of it. I just didn't paint it at all, ever. And then all of a sudden there's a line there. I said, what is this? This is very odd. And the person said, oh, isn't that great? The computer technician doing the color matching couldn't get the right color for the background and his robe, and so he had the great idea to cut him out, with Photoshop or whatever program he's using, and then work with the color. And then he plugged it back in. Isn't that great? He got it. And I was thinking to myself, no, this is so awful. Where are my losts and founds in this atmosphere? You ruined it. I didn't say that, but I just say, could I have that proof? No, this isn't right. A big important part of this is we need these losts. It's like the real world. I thought, well, I could, have your photographer come out to my studio. I'll teach you all this about atmosphere, and you'll be a better photographer. But, and actually, if you look at photographs from this time, they understood it, and they have single light sources, and so anyway, so I have this bad proof as a way of saying, see what you do if you zoom in and paint everything, give everything to the viewer. It's too much. We want that true to life sense of lost and found. So anyway, I have that good teaching tool from this portrait. Okay, so then, so I mostly did portraits for the first handful of years of my painting career. But then in, I think, 06 and 07, I got a commission to paint 4 images of St. John the Baptist for a church in Front Royal, so right near where we live. Some of these guys are from Front Royal. Know this church well, in St. John's in Front Royal. So it was a great start from my painting of religious subjects. So I did this visitation, and one of the important aspects of composition, composition is the putting together, like a composer of music puts together the music. So the composition is the putting together of a picture, and an important start of that at that point is, or first idea, or first principle is what's the size and shape of the space where it's going to hang. So usually work with the priest to figure out, should we do a Gothic arch? What fits into the church? The church had Gothic arched stained glass windows. So we chose that and tried to get the same proportion because you can have real pointy Gothic arches or less pointy. I just had a situation with an architect who was redoing a church, and I was doing the painting, and he wanted this real pointy, not real pointy, but it wasn't right. It wasn't quite right because the windows in the church had a certain proportion. You do learn how to make a Gothic arch by how far you go in on the spring line. 1/6 the rule, or 1/6 I think is 1/6 the width in gives you a very standard arch. And this architect wanted those pivot points to be way out there. I don't know, 1/15 the width in, and so it was too pointy in my opinion. Anyway, you have to deal with that with the architects, and so you decide about how to fill the space, what kind of space, what kind of shape, and then how to fill it. So then the idea is like having Elizabeth up on stairs, so you can have the heads, one higher and one lower. Mary's coming to meet Elizabeth from down below. So I was very pleased to get this commission, and that's led to more. So I've done church work now pretty often. I probably do maybe 75% church work in the last 8 or 9, 10 years. So I'll show you a few. This is St. Raymond of Pennafort. There's a St. Raymond church in the Arlington Diocese in Virginia, and the priest asked me to do 2 images of St. Raymond. This is a pretty interesting story. I didn't know anything about St. Raymond, but he did this miraculous voyage from Mallorca, Spain, the island, across the Mediterranean to Barcelona, 180 miles. And they even know how long it took him. They said it was 6 hours, so he's doing 30 miles an hour. So I was going to paint a rooster tail behind his, but I didn't do that. So he wanted to leave Mallorca. He was working for the king, and the king was there. And Saint Raymond was his advisor, and told the king he was doing something that he shouldn't be doing, and the king refused to change. So he said, "Well, I'm leaving." And the king said, "Well, no, I'm not going to let you." And he told all the ship captains, "Don't take Raymond." He said, "Well, I'll do it myself." And so he went down to the shore and put his cloak out and tied his staff to his cloak, and I think he knelt on it, it says, and he sailed miraculously 180 miles. So I got to paint this. It's not the whole image. You can see the water below his cape. But I love this about my work, is getting to know about St. Raymond, getting to paint this big picture for St. Raymond's Church, which had no image of St. Raymond. And so the people get to see this very amazing story. It's now front and center. It's big. It's life-size picture. It's right up left and right of the sanctuary. So I'm very happy to be able to do this job. And I did a painting of St. Joseph with young Jesus. And I like this drawing. I like the drawing maybe better than the painting, so I show you the drawing. Trying to show the closeness between the two. Joseph, teaching Jesus. That whole idea of did Jesus learn anything from St. Joseph? Being God, So that was kind of interesting to talk to different priests. Some would say some things. So one priest thought I should, show Jesus looking at Joseph, as if showing that he's learning from Joseph. I chose to show the closeness of them. Another thing to think of, the hands, you're trying to show closeness of hands or connections. Something I think Charles Cecil said, who's a great art historian as well as painter, talking about Michelangelo. If you look at Michelangelo's work, the hands are so wonderful and great connections. So there's some early Madonnas and child sculptures, relief sculptures of Michelangelo, where Mary's hands are very gently touching Jesus, and Jesus is doing the same thing to his mother. So pay attention to the hands; they're very important. And Michelangelo's very, very excellent at that. Okay, then the last bunch of slides are mostly for this nativity painting I did recently. This is just a little sketch I did to try to show the people at Oakcrest School in Virginia. It's the Opus Dei Girls' School in Northern Virginia. They wanted me to do a nativity, and they had this shape right above their tabernacle. So they had the tabernacle and the little altar that it's on, no woodwork behind it with the angels, and no painting. They had the crucifix above the tabernacle and the big dark wood archway, but no painting. So they asked me to design something. So this is one of the drawings to try to figure out what shape would fit in there. We also tried a tondo, which is perfectly round. So I had a little drawing in that shape and put it in on this drawing so they could look at them. And then I like the idea of these two angels, adoring angels, more paintings to do on this dark woodwork with gold leaf trim. It'd be very beautiful. But they haven't done that yet. Maybe could do that in the future. But I did get to do the big painting. So this is the initial sketch to try to figure out the size and shape. And I think it fits pretty nicely in there. Then we had to decide on the size. Do we really blow it up pretty large and let the figures be big, which I like because it's a big chapel. Let the painting carry so you can see it, make out what it is from the the back of the chapel. So that's sort of the first step. Then the second step is to find good models. And Dr. McNamara and I are talking about this. It's a very important and difficult aspect is trying to, paint Mary or paint Jesus or St. Joseph and make it look like they should, and not like in this case, my niece. This is my niece, who I think has a beautiful face for Mary, and she's right age. But it's difficult to make it look like Our Lady instead of this person So something to work on and think about. In this case, I was trying to show the closeness between mother and child, her gazing into the face of Jesus. So that's how I start with small drawings, just kind of regular sized drawings, and then work out the composition. So then I had drawing of Joseph, drawings of the sheep, drawings of the donkey, drawings of the cow, the cave. Actually, that cave, I found a little cave in Madison County, which I didn't even know about. So I went and did a little color study painting of the cave, and thought that was a good setting for this. So the more things I can actually look at, the more real, more believable it'll be. So this is the full-size charcoal drawing. After I get these drawings, so I put St. Joseph in here and worked out a lot of the details. Then I transferred the small drawings to a large drawing. So I like to have a full-size charcoal drawing to put up on the wall of the church where it's going to go. So the client, in this case, was the headmaster of the school, and a lady who was in charge of decorating the chapel. So I worked with the two of those ladies over about a 7-month period, and actually started talking to them before that. So a long process of working out size, shape, proportion, subject, and then some interesting things that they wanted. They wanted their school colors. They wore green and white plaid, and I was, that's a little difficulty to get some green and white plaid into Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. But it's there. I have to work with, they really wanted, because they wanted their girls, this girls' school, to connect with it. So the green and white plaid's in the back behind the donkey in that basket. They wanted a cardinal, because the cardinal is the state bird for Virginia, and the school's in Virginia. And they wanted dogwood, so that's a state tree. So you can see the dogwood way over there on the left. And the cardinal, I don't think the cardinal's in the drawing, but I really didn't want to do a bright red cardinal, because that bright chroma would really catch your eye and be a distraction to the main story. So I had the idea I should do a female cardinal, which I thought was very clever. It's a girls' school, and is much more subtle. So there is a female cardinal. So this is just a beginning to see there's a big blank canvas. Once I work out the composition from the small drawings to the big drawing, I know right where Mary's head is supposed to go on the canvas. So that's a huge, you have to get it right. You can't just kind of wing it on my big canvas. I've got to know where the things go. So that's why I do this drawing. And I can stand way back and decide, do I need to move for a little tiny bit one way or the other, make the changes there before I start painting. But once I'm happy and the clients are happy with this, the composition and the placement, then I move on to this. And I'll just measure over and say, I know her head goes right here. But then I get her back in again and paint her from life to get that sense of atmosphere and breadth, hopefully. So she was there just to the left of this big canvas, posing. So here it is about, well, I don't know, 60% done or so. No cardinal yet, but you see the green and white plaid, barely. At one point, some people said the donkey was stealing the show. And then I had a real baby. I used a doll baby for when my niece was posing. But then when I went to paint the baby's head, I did have a real baby, and the baby fell asleep in its mother's hands, just like that. So it really gave me a chance to paint. I think this is before at that point. Yeah, this is pretty early on. So I improved the baby's head. And there's a finished painting. you can see the cardinal on the basket handle. So it's not too obvious. I think the weak point are the angels. If I had my chance, I'd work on them a little bit. But I like the depth, trying to have the cow out in front, looking into the picture. So that was my big project for about a year and a half ago. I think it took about 7 months. And then I had a woodworker that I work with build this frame out of sapele wood, which they had in the chapel quite a bit. And then we actually gold leaf the inner lip of it. I think gold leaf and dark wood, mahogany type, is just a beautiful combination. And it sets off. It's hard to beat gold leaf with a painting. And there it is in its location. Trying to match some of I think it's sapele that the altar's made out of. So that was my big project for there. So this is actually the last slide I have of St. Therese. I did want to emphasize to especially you young folks, if there is something that you want to pursue like this, that's something that you love, I highly recommend chasing it, going after it. It's been very satisfying to me. I mean, someone asked about making a living as an artist, and it was very, very meager living early on, but just stay at it, and it gets better all the time. But it gives me the chance to do what I love most, to paint. And then for St. Therese, they know what St. Therese looked like because there are photographs of her. So I had to use a photograph in this case to get a likeness. So I had a good photograph, but then I had a model who I had good skin color and really good hands. I like these hands. So it's actually a friend who could be a hand model. You probably know Angela Dugas. Yeah, so she posed for this. And I got the habit from a Carmelite, another connection. Carmelites in Brooklyn lent me a habit and the cape for a couple months. Had real flowers, but then did try to do a combination of the photograph to get the likeness of St. Therese, and then the color from Angela, and then the outfit. But I think it was a successful painting. So I think my favorite compliment is from a lady at St. John's. At one point, said that when she says the rosary, she really loves to gaze at the visitation, and it helps her pray. So if I can help somebody pray by my art, then I'm very, very happy about that. In fact, I brought some cards of this, so I'd like to give them out if you'd like a card of St. Therese. So I want to encourage you to go after a love that you have. Find the right teacher, and then just latch onto that teacher and learn as best you can. How about questions? Any questions? This is mine. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
So you said earlier that you have 7 children. Is that right?
That's right, 7.
Okay. So were all of these while you were a father as well?
Yes. Yeah, we got married soon after I came back from Florence. 2001, we got married. And I started painting kind of seriously in 2000. But then I wanted Mary to experience Florence. So when we first married, we actually went and lived in Florence again, and I painted with Cecil some more, I think for about 4 or 5 months. That was really great to start off our marriage in Florence.
Yeah. And how did you balance fatherhood and just being a husband with all of your time dedicated?
Well, I try to teach it try to treat it like a regular 5-day-a-week job. So I go to my studio Monday through Friday. I do teach a little bit at Chelsea Academy, or 3, 4 of you went or going. But they give me first period in the morning, 3 days a week, 45 minutes long, so it's very minimal. So I'm there and then get to my studio. So I try to treat it like a regular job, 9 to 5. And really, over the years, I haven't been without a commission for at least a decade. So they trickle in. I just got one yesterday, in fact, to do a church painting, a Madonna and Child. They trickle in just right. I'm never overwhelmed, but right now I think I've worked for about a year, maybe a year and a half. So the dear Lord really has blessed me that way. So I'm able to have this big family and do what I really love to do. So, yeah.
So in a couple of the classes that I'm taking, which consist of my architecture and watercolor class, we have to take some sort of artistic liberties where there may not be a shadow there, but we put in a shadow there, or something is casting something else, or we need to push something back so we make it a little darker. How much in a lot of your paintings do you have to take those artistic liberties?
Yeah, that's a great question. Very, very good question. So in the training, we mentioned this to some students earlier. In the training, I don't like to do that. I mentioned this. I've had students when I critique their work, and when in the training, I'm really just trying to train the student's eyes to see accurately, see proportion right, angle, negative space, gesture, shape, value, so many things. In fact, that makes me think Gamble used to say, how do you break a bundle of sticks? Meaning, how do you get the right proportion? How do you get the right angle? How do you get the right chroma? How do you get the right shape? It's overwhelming. You feel like you're, going to panic and give up. Well, his saying was, you break a bundle of sticks one at a time. So you think about value, take care of that stick, take care of proportion. So anyway, so in the training, you can teach your eye, train your eye to see and get all these things right. It's very hard. It takes years. So when Paul was saying, you're not seeing color right, I didn't see it right for months and months. It took years. And then I started seeing, all that, sometimes there's a glow in a shadow. I say, that's that chroma, that great, it's red and with that black, and not just black. That kills something. It makes it just dead. It's not alive. So you just start seeing better. So in the training, I don't like to take liberties because it's always an excuse. I have a student that say, well, I did that on purpose. Well, you didn't get the proportion right. I'm trying to teach you to see that proportion right. And if you make that excuse, then I can't teach you. So for the training, don't do that. But then once you can get proportion right or get shape, then yes, then you do need to. What I like to do, because I really want to get that atmosphere and that truth to life, I'll make the change in the model, not on my painting. So if I want to increase that dark, then I'll have them turn a little bit more away from the light. Or if I want more something or other. Because if you can get what's happening with this light in this studio, in this atmosphere on the canvas. So as soon as I start making something up, it looks like a picture. And there's a good story. Velázquez, that Spanish painter who excelled at this, went to Rome in 1650 to buy paintings for King Philip V, IV. And he stayed there for over a year. He painted Pope Innocent X when he was there. And he painted his servant, Juan de Prasia, while he was there. That painting, and I always thought, I haven't heard this, but I think he would have painted his servant in his studio in Rome. He wasn't used to Rome. He'd only been there a short time. My guess is he painted his servant, had him pose to practice for the Pope. So there's a great painting of Juan de Prasia. It's in the Met in New York. It's that Moorish-looking man, if I know it. And then he painted Pope Innocent X, which is, he was a Pamphili, and that's in the Doria Pamphili in Rome. This great painting of the Pope, all in red velvet with his red hat. He looks really stern and lace. It's a beautiful painting. So apparently the story is that in the Pantheon in Rome, there's an exhibit of art, and Velázquez had his two paintings up, his two portraits. It's a real highlight in art history, in the Pantheon, Velázquez. And an Italian artist was talking to somebody that wrote this down, was pointing out all the Italian painters, said, look at these look at us Italians. We paint nice pictures. But look at Velázquez. He painted life. It's because he had this idea of atmosphere. So anyway, long answer. I will make changes, but I try to do it in the model, in the setup, and then I can paint what's happening with that light, that situation. And then I think the trick is to train yourself so well, and then once you have that craft, then you can do lots of things. And then you can loosen up and do something less tight, less finished, more impressionistic. But if you can't do the real highly finished, then you're kind of stuck with, I mean, you're limited. So, yes?
If you practice with live models when you're learning, does that ever get like embarrassing? Like, I assume it doesn't always turn out super well at the very beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And if you have to show it to them, that just seems difficult. How does that work?
What, show the model?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I have a lot of pictures that are really bad that I keep kind of hidden away. It's kind of funny to pull them out. In fact, there was one I finished, a portrait with Ingebrigtsen after year 4, and I thought I was ready to go off on my own and be a professional. And now I look at it and think, how in the world did I think that? It was not very good. So yeah, there's a lot of, well, I guess you're just, as you're a student, and so you're not really there to please the model. You're paying the model. So early on, when you're a professional, and I had this happen, that was bad. I did a portrait of a man. No, I did a portrait of a guy up in New York City, Upper West Side, big, huge house, townhouse, painted his wife and baby, and it didn't go well. And so that was embarrassing. Anybody else? Yes.
What would you advise for people who are beginning to paint in oil or trying to paint portraits in oil?
Well, I would advise finding a teacher, a really good teacher that you want to paint like. You know, like that great portrait by Ingebrigtsen. You know, when I saw what he could do, that's what I want to paint like. You know, I didn't know anybody could paint like that. Looks like a Van Dyke. Looks like a, you know, like a Sargent. And he's doing it right here. So find somebody like that and latch onto them and spend as many years as you need until you can paint. And then don't worry about painting just like your teacher. And there's only one case I know of where a teacher and student are almost interchangeable. You probably know the artist Bouguereau, the French artist Bouguereau. His first wife, his French wife, died. He was French, 19th century, great painter, very academic, means very finished. But he married an American student, a young lady named Elizabeth Gardner, and she was an art student of his. They got married. She painted with him so much that you can almost not tell the two apart. So she's a case where you really, maybe too much so, painted like her teacher. But most of the time, you have your own self, your own little bit of style. You don't necessarily kill your style by learning from a master. So I would say that's, latch on to somebody and really learn. But you have to find somebody that can do what you want to do. Find something, a great painter in history, the type of painting you like, that you want to paint like, and then find a teacher who can do that, and then learn from them. Yes.
Thank you so much for speaking tonight. So, John Paul II, in his letter to artists, talks a lot about how the role of the artist is to kind of see beyond into, beyond what is immediately materially present, like the heavenly reality, and to make that known. When you're painting specifically religious art, how does that role not overwhelm you, and what kind of disciplines do you take on to, make that reality known?
That's a tough question. And actually that's what Dr. McNamara and we're talking about, and that's very, very difficult. The icon painters really want to paint something otherworldly, so they do elongate the faces, the noses are long, mouths are tiny because they want to emphasize silence and prayerfulness, and so you have the gold leaf background, very flat. So they want to be otherworldly. In the Western tradition, and thank goodness for the iconoclasts losing in the 8th century, so we can paint images and figures. My training and what I love in the Western tradition, the Renaissance artists, Michelangelo and Raphael, and then Baroque, Velázquez and Vermeer and Van Dyck, and then the 19th century, these guys, Tarbell and Decamp, they are so interested in this, what I've been talking a lot about the atmosphere. So that's what I do. And I try to do that in my religious work as well. So I'm hopeful that just the beauty, the gracefulness will shine through, and that will make it appealing and draw people into it, make it prayerful. So I'm not an icon painter, and I don't try to make my painting otherworldly. That's just not my style. It's not what I want to do. But I do hope that my pictures in churches draw people's minds to God, help them to pray. So that's what I do with this way I've been taught, what I love. So it's a very good question and what we've been talking about. And so maybe I want to pursue this more about who are the great artists in the Western tradition that are the best religious painters. What makes Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel so great? But when I look at it, I don't think about praying. I think about, boy, that's good. So that's a great question. What makes the best religious art? Is it iconography, Russian iconography, Greek icons, or is it Raphael doing a Madonna and Child? This beautiful tenderness, beautiful colors. Like one thing I like to use silk for my Madonnas. But silk wasn't in the Holy Land. I think maybe it came in the 400s, 500s, 600s. But I'm not terribly worried about historical accuracy. I'd rather do something beautiful that will catch your eye. And silk is so beautiful, the way the colors shimmer and the colors in the darks. So I guess beauty and gracefulness, lovely composition is what I'm trying to do, and to get people to be drawn to it. So, anybody else? Yes.
You mentioned that a book that you really like, your slides, and I was wondering if you could tell us a bit how stories influence your art.
Okay, that's a good question. That book is Juan de Pareja, which I recommend. It's a little bit young for college age, but I enjoyed it. And our children read it. It was just fun to look at an artist from that perspective. Another book I recommend, I'm kind of a little bit sidetracking. Another book I like very much is about Millet, Jean-Francois Millet, the French artist who painted the Angelus and the Gleaners. Now he's a religious painter who's very, very, very effective. To see, and it's not specifically, it's not Madonna and Child, but can you all picture the Angelus where this man and woman are working in the field and they've stopped to pray the Angelus at noon, and you can see the church steeple in the background because imagine the bells are ringing. That story about Millet is really great. He was born a peasant up near the English Channel, but he had a great ability to draw as a child. The local priest recognized it and talked his parents into letting him teach the boy, so he learned to read and write and arithmetic, and then went to an artist in another nearby town and learned to draw. Eventually went to Paris, and he learned to paint, and he started painting the kind of the fashionable pictures of the day to sell in galleries in Paris. But he did that for a little while and just said, that's not what I want to do. I want to paint what I know, what I grew up with, these peasants. So he went back to where he was and painted the Gleaners. There's three ladies picking up the leftover straw or hay, or the Angelus. So he painted what he loved. He had a big family. He had 9 children, but painted his whole life. So that's a great book, by Millet, by, actually I'm not going to remember the author. Hopefully I'll think of it. But that's something to read. But you were asking about how stories influence my work. Well, I like to try to learn something about the saint, say, or the story. In fact, I just did a painting. So I do some research or some reading about the situation. St. Raymond, that was fun to learn. But an interesting one I just did was Jesus giving the keys to St. Peter. And maybe you've heard the idea that that was done in Caesarea Philippi, in front of this big, huge cliff. In fact, 2 of the Gospels mention Caesarea Philippi. I think Matthew says, in the region of Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asked, "Who do people say that I am?" And that led to Peter, what he said, and Jesus giving the keys to St. Peter. And then in Mark, it says, on the way to Caesarea Philippi. But it's interesting that he mentioned, the 2 of those mention this place. It's north in the Holy Land, I think north of Galilee. I've never been there, but I looked at a lot of photographs. I probably should have gone there for this painting, but I did the setting of this painting with this big giant cliff behind it, and there is a cave that used to be filled with water, and it was unfathomable. So they thought that maybe was one of the gates to Hades, and Jesus says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against you. So that was interesting. That's there. That symbol's there. There's a sanctuary to the god Pan, the pagan god Pan, and this massive cliff wall. So there's a priest named Stanley Yaki who wrote a book about why he thinks Jesus would have used this setting as the setting for this episode of giving the keys, or not necessarily giving actual keys, but saying, "You are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church," as opposed to this sanctuary and this rock. Here's my rock. So I like to do some research or find out about what I'm painting that way. All right. It's good. Okay, great. Thank you.